Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Christina Höfner, a member of the executive of FLANS, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on the education environment scan. I find important document to go through, and there's lots in there that Derek had researched and compiled in order to see what we should or have to discuss within the education sector in New Zealand. So let's start with the karakia. Whaia te maturanga kia marama. Kia whai takina mahi katoa. Tu maia, tu kaha. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tato ia tato katoa. I'm very happy that you're all here. This webinar today is organized by FLANS, by the Flexible Learning Association of New Zealand. And we want to bring people together to discuss education topics that are relevant to us. Of course, the focus is very much on Aotearoa, New Zealand, but at times we also bring in international speakers. And throughout the year, we are organizing some webinars, but this year we also have a conference. And the information about the conference has now gone live so that you can all, submit your papers or workshop proposals by the 16th of August. You can register. If you do that early enough, so within the next month until the 31st of July, you can even get a discount on it. And then show up to the conference on the 7th to the 9th of October at Otago Polytechnic in Otepotoi, Dunedin. The conference theme this year is He Tangata. So very aptly in a time where we are talking a lot about technology, that we are actually going to focus on the people. I'm going to share some more links to the education scan and also FLANS website in case you're not just a member during the session. And we also have the slides available from Derek that you will be able to download and view on your own. And so now I would like to hand over directly to Derek Wenmoth, the founder of FutureMakers. And many of you will know him already because he has been very proliferate in the New Zealand education space and also very influential in a number of initiatives, and now also continues his research and hopefully not freezing so much anymore because he had just builders in his house where he needed to keep all doors and windows open. So let's have a good session that also heats everybody from inside out and not just has heated conversations. Over to you, Derek.
Cool. All right. Tēnā koutou, everybody. Thanks, Christina, and thanks to FLANS for the opportunity to share this afternoon. The focus is, of course, the environment scan that I published on the FutureMakers website a little while ago, and seems to have stirred up a lot of interest. A little bit of background there. I used to, many years ago, do the 10 trends when I was with CORE, and about in 2022, I think I was asked by the ministry if I could put together an environment scan to help inform the emerging thinking they were doing around an IT strategy at that stage. And that I evolved a bit further and published it. And then last year I was asked whether I was going to update it because there was so much has changed in that last 4.5 years. And so the 2026 scan really was it's really a hobby project of mine, but it kind of just helps us think a bit more about what's going on in that broader education space. So you can download it free. There's a QR code there that you can use or take the link straight out of the chat. So let's get into it a little. Just what I'd like to do in our webinar today, because I could spend weeks going through this really, as you can imagine, but I want to give you a broad overview of the scan, then a little bit of a deep dive into about 4 areas that have a particular relevance to the open, flexible and distant learning kind of environment. The structure of this scan is portrayed in this diagram. And you'll notice around the outside there, they're the 8 areas that are a sort of expanded pestle framework. And so in the document, you'll find quite a bit of information and the research that goes behind it into those broader issues that are impacting our world today and what happens in education, like politically, everything from the democratic backsliding that we see happening right through to in New Zealand, the contestation around treaty and treaty principles. All of these things are happening in that broader milieu, but they all, in one way, shape, or form, potentially impact our work as educators, whether that's at the school level or in the tertiary space. And so you work around the economic. We don't have to look far to find examples of where that's a big issue at the moment in terms of cost of living, the fuel price affecting our ability to do a lot of things that we take for granted. There's a lot of things shifting in employment, and I know some of the people on the call today are involved in that kind of transition to work space and thinking about employment as the end goal of the work they do. But as things change in terms of the way people work, their portfolio careers, I highlight there that idea of training and working towards a particular job is reshaping the way that we need to think about things like careers education. But it also reshapes what we do as educators in our own employment and think about the work that we do. And I'll touch on that a bit later on. Technology is a wormhole you could go down. Of course, what prompted the first call I had was AI, because in the 2022 environment scan, AI sat in one of the outer rims. It was one of those things that we should keep an eye on because it was likely to impact us. It was working in the background. But of course, in the meantime, AI has become pervasive. The generative AI, large language models now, everybody is talking about them and knows them. Then there are all the things to do with the legal issues. And there are people on this call I know who have dealt with that in terms of things like ownership of the materials that we use for education, getting right through to thinking about that from a cultural perspective as well. What happens when we cross the line in terms of claiming ownership of images and songs and things that aren't ours. But we've got also contestation of the Education Act itself and the parameters around that as we see new things emerge, such as the charter schools and online charter schools starting to come into New Zealand as well. Our environmental issues, I'll pick that up. But we talked about AI over in the technology space, but you can't stop talking about AI without thinking about the environmental impact. And I spent an hour or so this morning actually on an international call looking at the impact of AI use on the global energy grid. And at the rate it's going, it's quite phenomenal, just how much energy is being used for that. We go into the social side of things. This is where that being human starts to count, and we start to confront all the issues around health and mental health, physical health and well-being. We've got the big moves in terms of demographic diversification, the numbers of different people groups that now are in New Zealand, and what that means for the way that we embrace differences in culture and language and identity and so forth. And of course, like we were talking in the political area about treaty contestation, you've got the same thing happening, what the implications of that are for many of our communities. And finally, in the education space, we've got those persistent achievement gaps seem to be the thing that are driving everything at the moment, back to the sort of back to basics. Let's just fix the basics and everything will flow seems to be happening. But you go down the list of what I've got there. We've had, the structured and explicit approaches to teaching, founded on the so-called science or sciences of learning or learnings. But we've got rethinking assessment as a huge area going on at the moment, where we're rethinking how do we actually measure success in education. Of course, for distance educators, that's been a very top of mind thing for many, many years, probably more so than traditional classroom teachers, because in the instructional design process, of course, you start with the end in mind. You've got all of that needing to be thought through. And when you throw into the coin people who may start and stop at different points along the way, the very essence of the open in Open Polytech, for example, assessment becomes a whole different kind of ball game we play. NCA under scrutiny, all that sort of thing. Now, that's a very high level view of the areas that are gone into and much more depth in the scan itself. But I want to look at the middle part of the diagram. The big blue circle titled Current Education Initiatives, really, those are the things I've taken specifically from the Ministry of Education website, and haven't gone much broader than that at the moment, because there's enough there to get us going. But, for instance, charter schools isn't mentioned explicitly there, but it could well be. There's a whole lot of other things that are initiatives that sort of are happening there. But the key point then is the inner two circles. The next one I've called pain points, because these are the things that any conversation with educators around New Zealand start to talk about these. And I initially had a list that was getting up to about 40 or 50 of these, as you could imagine. But I kind of just slimmed them down to what's in there. But then out of that, we had the burning platform idea. Now, the idea of a burning platform is something that if we simply sit on our hands and ignore it, it's going to really impact us in ways that are significant, in that we will see changes happen that we're just not prepared for, or maybe don't even know how to address. So just look at those in a different way. I've gone one through. I had a little summary slide, but it's obviously got lost. The burning platforms that we've got there, AI disruption, is without doubt every signal that we're looking at, every part of that we're going down the track of at the moment, highlights that perhaps the AI revolution, if you like, has got much broader extremes of impact than anything else that we've experienced, both in terms of the potential positives, but also the potential negatives. And if any of you happen to be readers of my blog, you'll see that in the last week I had a meeting with the chap who's with Ray, who is the CE of the Laura Ferguson Trust, but he acts internationally, looking at the things that are going on at the moment in young people's lives with the use of AI bots as well as humans, to basically steer young people towards suicidal thoughts. Very scary stuff. And that's just one small snippet of that. But we've got a whole lot of things happening in that AI space that make it a disruptor that could really change the game in ways that we're just not prepared for. So I go into that a lot in the thing. The teacher workforce, I'll pick that up as one of the things I want to look at a bit further. But we've got a teaching workforce that is aging. We haven't got enough teachers. We haven't got enough specialist teachers in the right places. It's a global problem, and we can't just keep on going, oh, we're going to fix the system and teachers need to do such and such, when there simply aren't the teachers with the necessarily knowledge, skills, ability, or longevity in the area. Climate change, I'll pick on that one, and why it's probably not the best heading, but it was what I gave it at the time. But under that are all the things that are happening that are impacting the ability of schools to remain viable as a functioning unit, as a face-to-face place to meet. I'll unpack that. And then there's the cyber threats, which was really what I was talking about before, after my chat with Ray. And I just want to draw attention why I think it's important that an environment scan like this is given a little bit of airtime in our staff rooms, in our staff meeting, in our own professional lives. Any of you who follow futures thinkers will have come across Amy Webb, I'm sure. A few years ago, she wrote this book called The Signals Are Talking, and she introduces the concept of how we watch for signals as a kind of a signal, well, an idea of what's coming next. And that's really what the scan's about. There in the scan are a lot of signals that we need to be taking notice of and sometimes extrapolating that. How they're useful is this. Those things around the outside of the scan are both our signals. We can see things that are happening. We look, so for instance, at something like AI reshaping work. We see jobs changing. So they are also then we can delve in and say, so what's driving that? And for many, if you look at some of the things that are happening overseas, particularly where the population growth hasn't been keeping up in order to keep the supply demand going. And so we haven't got enough people to take the jobs on. The driver behind that becomes an economic one. We need robots, we need AI, we need other people or other things to do those core functions in society. So then you start to think, so what are the implications? If we go down that track, where does that lead us? What happens at the end of the day? And then what actions must we take in order to both implement but also mitigate the risk associated with that? So if we think about that, where the signals are those early indicators, the things that are on the horizon that we think, oh, we've seen this happening, or I've heard of this happening, oh, I see something or other else. They're happening all around the place at the moment, but easy to miss. The drivers are the forces behind those signals, all right? They can be economic, technical, social, political, as I've got there. They're causing that change. And at the moment in education, when we see a lot of this change being thrust upon us by the top level, government and so forth, often we're not as aware as we, I think, should be around what the drivers are behind that. And some of those, to be honest, are quite sinister. Others are quite naive and unthought through. And so when you think about the implications, it's about sitting saying, so what does this change mean for me? How's it going to impact me, the work that I do, my students, my learners, the context that I've got? And that's both positive and negative, the challenges and opportunities, until finally you say, okay, so now what things that are in my locus of control are we going to do? Where am I going to invest? What decisions will I make? What commitments will I make? And so forth, right? And so as we're looking through some of the things I want to share today, just bear that in mind. Just a highlight that in the document is a table. It's not all colored and beautiful like this one, but it's a table that kind of differentiates between a lot of these drivers and signals that are happening at the global level, right? And then the ones that are more New Zealand specific. And there's a relationship you'll see between the two. And almost certainly all the global ones impact us here in New Zealand. But for those in the New Zealand audience, the New Zealand specific ones are quite important. You see here, the charter school reintroduction is listed. I mentioned I hadn't highlighted as a government initiative, but it's all there. So I think it's fairly comprehensive, as you'll see, and hopefully embraces the sorts of things that you might be looking for. So just to reiterate, our pain points, we've got a lot of reform happening at the moment without any basis in fact. The reform without roots, or if they have roots that are claimed, they're very contested, right? We've got the foundations, the very foundations are cracking. We've seen this week the concern over the numbers of students leaving school to go on to alternative education. And, bang, we hear all the focus goes on to the solution. Oh, we've got to fix what's happening with alternate ed. And that's not a bad thing to focus on. But why don't we focus also on, so why are they leaving in the first place? What's actually not happening for them in our existing education system that makes them want to leave. Uh, we've got huge inequity. I think New Zealand still rates in the top 3 in the OECD in terms of the inequity that exists within our education system. We've got lots of kids turning up, but they're not really there mentally, present in body, absent in mind. This is my summary of kind of some big themes. We've also got a generational pressure thing that people my age sit around and say, "Oh, you don't know how lucky you are. We had to eat, jam rolls on a cardboard box on the side of the road, all sort of stuff." Actually, our current generation are under enormous stress and pressure, and for many of them, they don't see a hopeful future for themselves. So those are pain points that influence people's connection and chronic absences. Despite all of the measures we've put in place, many schools still aren't achieving the attendance things that they need to. The burning platforms I've talked about, and in the current initiatives. The reason I put this up here is just to show with that diagram, which you can sort of see vaguely in behind, part of the conversation that we need to be having in our workplaces is to say, where's the line of sight? Where if we've got a burning platform issue, that's maybe representative of a pain point or whatever, where's that initiative addressing that? How is it meant to address that? And how is that linking through to the broader things that are part of this environment scan? Are they realistic, or are we operating in a way that's just something that we've done in the past because we always address these problems in this way? So let me pick up on some of the things in particular. The first one, and these are ones I've just chosen because they impact open, flexible distance learning. And there are people on this call I know who were at the heart of some responses. You remember Cyclone Gabrielle just a few years back. It was a real wake-up call to what happens when weather events, which are a part of the climate change thing, cause schools to be unable to operate. And of course, we've had it with pandemic, we've had it with the earthquakes in Christchurch. It's not only climate related, but the climate one's worth thinking about because it's going to, according to all of the signs and all the signals, we are seeing an increase in the amount of climate disruption affecting the world. So what happens when those extreme weather events or other phenomena mean that we can't operate as campus-based institutions? And here's the irony. We hear lots and lots of political pressure going on about attendance and about how important it is for students to be in school and not miss any school. And yet when one of these events happens and schools have to close for a day or a week or a month, we aren't prepared to say, so how can we make sure that there's continuity of access? And this is where I've argued for many years the open, flexible distance learning community are very well prepared to help address that. Just some of the facts, I won't read all of those out, but on that slide there, you start to look at the size and scale of the problem. It's not just a school or two schools. This affected whole communities, and for a period of time. When you look at that, over 6 weeks after the cyclone, there were still 3 schools that were shut. And NZCR's report on this that I've referenced at the bottom is really worth a read to understand just how significant this is. And if you look at it, we've got problems with flooding. So there was the NZCR survey again that I talked about. 41% of the principals reported flooding impacting their schools. That's, over a third, just less than a half. You see that the regions, 15 out of 16 regions, where the weather effects were being felt, climate-related effects being felt. Heat disruption, which is, if you think about the signals, our heat disruption is going to be just as big a problem for many areas in New Zealand as the increased rain and extreme weather events. And our exposure going forward, as released under the NZCR thing, they've identified there 1,100 kura, about 44% potentially exposed to coastal surface or river flooding. This is not a small problem. This is huge. All right. So where do we fit with that? Well, I've been a strong advocate, as many of you will know, and on the FutureMakers website, there are a number of thought pieces highlighting how we need to be thinking about hybrid and flexible learning approaches that can kind of kick in times like this, or not just kick in times like this, because as we'll look a bit further down, if we've got them operating effectively within the school or through services where we are able to provide for students who can't otherwise get access to particular parts of their education system, then we're a much better system, a much better position at least, to see that continuity of access continue. So I'll pick up on it a little bit further down the track, but in the meantime, let's have a look at the other one here, the cyber threats, which are affecting what we do in a lot of different ways. I mean, I'm old enough to have come through as the new technology was giving us new opportunities to do things in new ways, and we excitedly embraced it and set up learning management systems and started using email and using all sorts of things, not really fully aware at that stage or understanding the potential impact of what was happening to that data that was being shifted around, for example, and the exposure to risk through sharing personal information when we just willy-nilly share our email to sign up to something. And so this one really is a burning platform. And AI has changed the nature of the threat. Back in 2022, this was one of the burning platform issues even back then. And it was around the time that Waikato Hospital and had its big close down because they'd been attacked. And at that time, I remember talking with colleagues in Microsoft who monitor the attacks that are coming into New Zealand on a daily basis. And they were showing me that health was right up the top of the list when it came to the areas that were being deliberately targeted and attacked by external players. The only one that was above health was education, and it was getting somewhere between 4 and 5 times the number of attacks or attempted attacks. And that was Microsoft. If you talk to the likes of N4L, they will tell you the same. The last time I was talking with them and looking at their figures, it was getting into the thousands of attacks per hour that they were fielding off at the perimeter. All it takes is one of those to get through, and we could have some problems. So when we think about cyber threats and data theft and the IP risk around that, and when we think about our job as distance educators, by the very nature of our work, we've been operating through digital systems almost by default. You know, we've been the early embracers and early adopters of this. And so our openness and exposure to that risk is quite high up there and requires us to think carefully before we start to implement the latest gizmo or gimmick or whatever. You know, if we're saying, oh, I think I'll just have this little quiz app that I've found on the internet as part of my course, and so I'll implement it. What does that mean in terms of just another layer of risk that you're adding to your digital exposure? So that's one of the things. I've got a question there. When did your organization last test its incident response plan? We're all supposed to have them, but when did you last test it? How do you know that it would close down effectively, or that you could recoup that data, or that you would be able to identify where the threats come from? This one here I want to just dwell on for a little bit, because you sort of think, oh, how does that affect us? Workforce concerns. Well, in the broader scheme of things, we've got some big issues. We've got a fading teacher workforce with a significant percentage of teachers who are in that near retirement age group. We've got, like many parts of the world, a huge problem in attracting people into the profession. Most teacher educator providers, despite a lot of what's sort of said, but they struggle to get the sorts of numbers of highly desirable sort of applicants into their programs or to apply for programs. And that's been going on for the last 2 decades and getting worse. And then you've got the third thing where for many of those people who are training, they don't see themselves being in teaching for more than 5 to 7 years. And in fact, the data is showing that the numbers of the percentage of young teachers leaving within that 5 to 7 year period is increasing significantly. And the downstream impact of that, of course, is how do we build a profession that is building the foundation of the knowledge and the experience and the skill that we need when we've got that constant churn. So there are some big things here to consider, and the data's in the report, and I've put some of the stuff up here. The ministry itself has talked about the crisis as being structural, not cyclical. There's this. You've got the national shortfall of 710 teachers projected. Well, that's around about 2+ teachers per secondary school. It might not sound a lot, but when you think about the size of a lot of our secondary schools, it has that impact. The subject specialists are where it bites hardest, and we've got big gaps. And it used to be the smaller schools like the Roxburgh area schools or the Pangaroo area school that felt this because by nature, their size, they didn't have the teachers to teach those subjects. But now it's almost every single school in the country that can't provide the breadth of subjects that their students require. And that classroom level impact being already visible. Some of the schools that I work in, I only work in a small number in depth by choice. But as we sit down at the beginning of each year and start looking at enrollments and subjects and all this sort of thing, the impact on students when they can't access what it is that they want to do is quite phenomenal, really. And so we find ourselves back into the 1950s, 60s, 70s when I was going through school sort of drafting gate. Here are the subjects that you'll do. You haven't got any other choice. So this is one of the areas that I think our open flexible distance learning community can fill. And I've noted down there, Te Kura, NetNZ, Aotearoa have been doing fabulous work in this area for some years, each in their own way. But my encouragement, I think, if we read the signals and certainly look at the experience from COVID and other things, the operating model, even of those organizations, is going to have to change quite significantly because most have, to some degree or another, and I acknowledge the changes are happening, but most still operate within that class course type model, class course teacher kind of framework. And with the degree of change that is thrust upon schools and individuals when they are hit by things like COVID or weather events or anxiety or health issues, means that those sorts of structures don't easily translate into an emergency response, for example. One of the things that I've done with he's Canadian but living in America, and Michael Barber, we started this a couple of years ago, and we're updating it right at the moment, where we've attempted, like Michael has done for both the US and Canada, similar study, to actually document what actually is happening on the ground, who are the providers and what do they provide and how do they provide it, and who are they providing it to, so that data is available. One of the things I was involved with the ministry, I got invited to help them out when COVID struck, and none of that information was available, which meant huge delays to being able to make decisions about how the open flexible distance learning community might be able to respond. And so it's important that this information is just made publicly available and that we're able to use it to demonstrate the capability that we have as a nation to respond in those instances. This was picked up by a piece of work that Flans did and published last year, wasn't it? And I encourage you to read this report because it's been very well put together. And the recommendations that you can see there, there needs to be a robust policy and regulatory framework. We don't have that, right? And so we've got, particularly over the last year, we've seen the emergence of a number of players in the open flexible distance world having a nip here and a nip there. We've had charter schools or charter school applications being put in for new entities to provide all of their learning in a distance way. And without a robust policy and regulatory framework, we've got no real idea or understanding of how well prepared those entities or agencies are for carrying out the business that they say they're going to do. And those of us who have been involved in the open flexible distance learning space for a while know that there's a lot to take into account. I remember I had a conversation a couple of years ago with an organisation that was looking to make an application to become an online charter school, and their focus was on how they could get more students to channel into the organisation that they were. When we got down to nuts and bolts, the group that I was talking to, and admittedly it was early stage, but none of them knew what a learning management system was, for example, that they hadn't considered that there might be systems and structures and things that already are used that would address the sorts of things that they want to do. We need that formal recognition and sustained support, not just, a knee-jerk reaction. Sustainable funding. I'm sure that if my friend Rachel was here, she would be, giving that one a big tick because she's been very, at the vanguard really of highlighting how important that is. And you'll see there the enhancing teacher capability goes back to what I was talking about before about teacher workforce. So that workforce one is a problem in my view that we've got. It's almost, you go around and talk to most of the people who are involved in any form, whether it's teachers in schools doing the hybrid kind of approach, or even people who are in some of our distance learning institutions. We don't have a pipeline for ensuring that they are well catered for and well prepared for that role. We've talked for many years within FLAMS, and we've actually had a number of attempts to set up training opportunities for people to learn more about that. I remember I benefited personally. It was an eye-opener for me back in the early 2000s, early 1900s, 1990s, before the World Wide Web became. But that was where my really deep interest in distance ed started. And I had the opportunity to undertake a master's program at Deakin University, specifically looking at distance ed. And so we were introduced to the whole gamut of instructional design, how you interact with students and provide quality personal support for them. What about the economic model sitting behind it, et cetera, et cetera. And without that, it's very hit and miss how we are developing a culture of experienced educators in that area. And you'll see I've mentioned even initial teacher education. We'd tried for years to get distance providers such as Te Kura, the correspondence school, recognised as a valid place where someone could go and do a teaching practicum, for example, and learn the ropes at least that way. So I'm rushing because I'm just aware of time, but AI and the assessment crisis, I've linked these two things because I think assessment is like the burning issue around AI at the moment, even to the point where our own Minister of Education has been talking about using AI to work with assessment. But as I get around schools, very few schools I come across now where I don't hear in the staff room teachers talking about how they're using ChatGPT to formulate the summative comments that are going into kids' reports and things. Right now, all of that's fairly superficial. There are much deeper issues at stake, but the Pew report that I've referred to there was talking about, this is 2025, late last year. They say this is the new normal. It's the 54% recorded by them use chatbots like ChatGPT or Copilot to help them study. 69% of teachers use AI weekly out of the NZCER report. There was also the report that Tim Gander and his colleague did last year that had very similar kind of responses. So we know that this is being worked with and on, but without those same guidelines and things that we were talking about for distance education. And here are some areas that it has. I've just summarized them really quickly, but there's a cognitive cost. The MIT did a study that they looked at the notion of cognitive offloading, where we're just putting in our prompts and thinking we're so clever and then just using whatever comes up without really digging deeper into that. And we could delve into that for ages. There's the sheer scale of ungoverned use that both Pew and NZCR talk about now. It's happening, and it's got no kind of set of measures over it. And then there's this whole idea of the academic integrity in it. Are we accepting of this? I mean, I've got two grandsons staying with me at the moment who've just finished high school. They're in their first year of university, just come to stay with me for a week. And we were talking very briefly about different experiences they had both at high school last year and now at university this year, where they're being told by some of their teachers and lecturers, you cannot use AI, can't involve it in any way, shape, or form. And others saying, use it as much as you like, but then make sure that you apply your own thinking at the end kind of messaging. And so without some sense of uniform thinking as a profession and really addressing the deeper issues, not going for a superficial solution, we could be a bit stuffed. So finishing off, what does all this mean for ODL? A big thing is we need to build the capacity to hold complexity. We are failing ourselves and our profession and our future generation by this idea we can just pick off these things bit by bit and do things. Oh, we'll fix that problem, we'll fix that one. They don't. What's happening is the future is a convergence picture. It's many things coming and impacting the same area. And my point down there, the single domain leader, the one focused just on one particular area, I'm just a physics teacher, or I'm only going to do this. I said, you're going to be perpetually surprised because it's just not going to work. I've been reading Rosemary Hipkins' book on lifelong learning in an age of in the post-truth world, where she talks about how important it is that we deal to this idea of complexity and don't just pick off things one by one. So an example of that I've got here, if we can embrace an AI tool to change how students complete assignments, right? And we think, okay, that's about an assignment challenge, but it also becomes an equity issue. If we think who has access to the technology to be able to do a legal issue, what about the data it's drawing from and re-representing? What about a workforce issue? Who has the professional learning to understand and be able to distinguish which of this now is AI generated and which of it is the student's work, and how do you distinguish and how do you make that happen? It's a social issue. What does that mean for future human capability and connection? So that's a convergence of these things that we need to be preparing ourselves for and holding complexity. The other thing is that our delivery model is really a lived example of holding that complexity. That resilience strategy, an equity strategy, a workforce solution, all those things. We've been talking about these things for years and years and years as being a strength for the open, flexible learning, distance learning community. But we need to step up and work much more cohesively and influence policy. And I've put those two failure modes down the bottom. Both are real. You know, there's the leader who waits for clarity before acting, and we've got lots of those. You know, we probably think of some of those in our own institutions. You know, oh no, we won't move on that. We're just going to wait for this. You'll just be waiting forever, all right? And you get further and further behind. Or the leader who acts without acknowledging the complexity. Oh, we've got this new tool. We're going to put it in now, and that's going to change, all right? Both of those are problems that we've got to think more carefully about. And here's finally the big one that was in the report that Flans put together, and it just naturally fell out of the synthesis of everything in the environment scan, is that we really are at a point where, and it's not a new thought, we can't address this within a single 3-year parliamentary term. I listened to our previous Prime Minister, who's now just, name's just gone from my head for a second, Helen Clark, with the Helen Clark Foundation, have just published a new book, or about to publish it at the end of the month, I think, where they're looking at things. And I listened to her talk with Jack Tame on the radio or television the other morning, and she was talking about this constant kind of flow that happens, and it's that start, stop, change direction, change direction. And of course, the most stunning example we've got of where this has worked, of course, was with Finland, when they decided to reform what they were doing, and they made a commitment cross-party to a 20-year plan to reform, and we know the story of what happened there for them. So here's finishing off, you know, the question we need to ask, if I've prompted you to think about anything, and I realize I've just rushed through this, but I've left in the wake a lot for you to read and think about. Just ask yourself, what signals are you noticing now that could become a defining force for learning in the next 5 to 10 years? And what should we be doing today because of it? And the other sort of bigger esoteric thing, what future education system are we preparing for, and what evidence is shaping that picture that we've got? So just a couple of questions to leave, to take back to your own context, think about. The scan, as I say, available online at that point. This presentation is available if you wanted to take that QR code. And with that, I will finish the roller coaster and leave it open if there are any questions that have come back, Christina, to answer, or whether anyone wants to do that. Otherwise, you get an early lunch.
Thank you so much, Derek, for taking us through the scan. There's definitely a lot in there. And I particularly also liked the convergence point, so not looking at one area on its own, because of course they all impact each other. Very early on, when you gave your introduction, we had a question from DN, and that was, what about respect and trust? Politicians of the profession, parents of schools and schooling. Do you want to respond to that? And while you're thinking about that, if anybody has one question, we can take one or two.
So they just repeat the question, what about respect, trust?
DN, yeah. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, only
I'm asking the person who
posed the question.
Do you want to pose your question via the microphone? You're very welcome to unmute yourself. If not, I'm reading it again.
If I can just say, Christina, that's another topic for a whole webinar probably. But just to say, if people are genuinely interested there, look out on the FutureMakers website, because within the next week, I'll be publishing another piece of work that actually addresses trust as the founding part of what we need to grapple with if we are going to make change that's meaningful and long-lasting.
Thank you. Any other questions for Derek? Or do you need to digest all you've heard first?
I see a number of people there who I've worked with in the past and who are part of the various VLNs and so forth. Ken, good to see you on there. And just if I can, encourage you in the work you're doing. This is and Lucy, I see there. This is so important that we are joined up and understand this convergence challenge and the things that are working in our favor at the moment. We just need to claim the territory.
Derek, then one quick question, well, maybe not so quick, but maybe we can have a 30 seconds or 1 minute soundbite from you on that. Of the 4 burning platforms that you mentioned, which one is the one that kind of gives you the biggest headaches at the moment, or which combination of the platform is it that you fear the most now?
The one I fear the most is cyber threats. The one I think is going to have the biggest impact without us really being aware of it is the AI disruption. The one that I think it keeps me awake at night is the profession, the teacher workforce one, because I think we've completely underestimated the impact of really neglecting to build and develop the profession for years. And the climate change one, well, I've banged on about that for ages. I think that's our biggest opportunity as the open flexible learning. So they all have a contribution in my thinking.
Yes, very good answer. Getting around the paper there. Lucy, you had a question or a comment.
Kia ora, Derek. Thank you. Really interesting. Like the shout out for the OFDL community and the VLNs, and thank you for the comments about the report there about enhancing education. I like you picking up on the recommendation about long-term sustainable funding, but also long-term policy, beyond just that quick turnaround. If that came into being, what would you see as being the top things? You were like, hey, we're doing this. Where to start?
Well, I remember having a conversation with Aotearoa about this. She asked me the same question. And I think there are 2 or 3 things that are quite obvious. If we think about policy, for example, or more legislative framework, the environment we operate within at the moment is very much pegged against a school being a physical place operating within a particular time frame and organized in a way with teachers working with groups of students, so teacher to class. And so much of our legislative frameworks, as I say, support that way of working. And it's not until we start to push against those, and the classic was when we had the earthquakes in Christchurch and we wanted to open schools from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. so that we could have some students in a school in the morning and some in the afternoon. And we got a message down here saying, what we were doing was illegal because the Act only defined a school as a place that was open for instruction from 8:30 till 3:30. And it took an urgent act of parliament, an urgent change to be able to allow that to happen for the period that it did. So with that, I think a really genuine trawl through those structural elements of our existing legislation to allow for more freedom and flexibility would allow some of those people in the system that are doing great stuff to fly. I mean, I think the role of a teacher, and so a teacher has to be assigned to a school. And I know that we've been pushing the boundaries of that a little bit better. If we actually understood who a teacher was and how they could be recognized, and that would open up both career pathways, it would open up the flexibility they could have to do their work and so on. So that's really scratching the surface as a response, Lucy, but that's where I would start at least.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Lucy. And that now takes us to the end of the session. But that is not the end of the conversation. If you haven't gotten through the environment scan yet, and I have the link is in the chat and also on Derek's blog and website, do go all the way to the end or almost all the way to the end, because there's a practical guide for how you can work with the scan in your own school, in your own institution. There's a number of activities as well as a planning tool. So make use of these resources and then get in touch with Derek and let him know how it went, what you found in your own environments, in order to also engage him in the conversation and see if there's any insight that would come out for a next scan or further conversations that we should also have here within the FLANS community. So I invite you to take a closer look at that and also involve your colleagues and maybe even your students and your parents into that conversation. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And I would just like us to finish with a karakia so that you can get off and into the rest of your day. Kia whakaira te tapu, kia waitea ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai. Homie huie tai kie. Kia ora, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.